Stepping off the golden path for me took place in incremental steps. But there was one giant step right at the beginning, which happened at the conclusion of my cross-country bike trip. I was campaigning for Zeke. He was running for president of the world, which was kind of a crazy thing to do. But it was a craziness that caught on, at least with the local media. When I left Seattle, a television station picked up on my trip, and Seattle had a pretty big reach, and so that got broadcast ahead so that the editors of the small town papers kind of knew that I was coming. The theme of the thing was kind of funky. I had just written this book about Zeke and the trial of Zeke Daniels. And I had also formed a nonprofit called One World Incorporated. And the concept of it was fairly simple, which is that we live in a world now where boundaries are less and less perceptible. We have trade agreements, and we have institutions of global governance, the International Court, and so on. And the history of society has been one of ever larger groups coming into play, and it seemed to me to be an inevitability that at some point we would start to recognize our commonalities of people on the planet. All this, of course, flies in the face of what seems to be emerging right now in the shadows of America and conservative movements that are taking place all over the world. Zeke's campaign was kind of a fun way to try and introduce this idea. Zeke was running for president, not of the United States, but running for president of the world. And he had a platform that was very simple, just 4 planks: peace, love, justice, and freedom. And then there was a serious underpinning to all this. I was carrying a scroll to the United Nations to be delivered on the 3rd Tuesday of September, on the 40th anniversary of the United Nations, a day in which, I think it was probably 40 to 50 heads of state would be gathered at the United Nations. So this trip unfolded, and when I would roll into a town, I was taking the Blue Highways. I would stop in at the local newspaper, and we had some friends back in California that were sending out press releases in advance of my arrival so that they knew I was coming, and we got a lot of press, actually. When I arrived on the East Coast, I decided to stop in and see an old friend from Harvard, a guy by the name of Bart Harvey. He had been captain of the wrestling team. Good guy. And Bart came from money. I believe his family was involved with Dean Witter, but he quickly became turned off by all of that and met a man by the name of James Rouse. James Rouse was a real estate developer who I had heard speak a couple times when I was at Sea Pines. Jim developed 40 festive marketplaces around the United States: Quincy Market in Boston, the Harbor in Boston, and others, as well as an 80 to 90,000 person community on the outskirts of Washington, Columbia, Maryland. When I arrived in Columbia, Maryland, I went to the main administration building, the American Cities building, I believe it was called, and locked my bike downstairs in the lobby and took the elevator up to the 5th floor where Bart's office was. Unannounced, of course. And I went up to the desk and I was standing there and I asked if Bart Harvey was there, and the receptionist said no, he wasn't there that day. But I looked down the hall, and there looking at me from the end of the hallway was Jim Rouse. And quite instinctively, Jim just walked out of his office and came down and shook hands with me. I was standing there in my sweats. I thought this was most extraordinary. And Jim, I explained that I had come to see Bart and I was a friend and classmate from Harvard. And he said, well, come on down. So I walked down with him to his office, and they were in the midst of a break from a meeting that was taking place, and he pulled up a chair and there were about 4 or 5 people around the table, and I just listened for a while. And at the conclusion of the meeting, Jim just started asking me questions and so on. And after about half hour, 45 minutes, he said, "You want a job?" Wow, I was taken back. And I explained to him that I had an agenda that I was working on, that I would love to have a job, but I had something more important right now. And I told him about One World Incorporated. Turned out I had come to the right person, because Jim Rouse, sorry for all the shaking of the camera there, Jim Rouse was a member of an organization called the World Federalist that had an agenda very similar to what I imagined for One World Incorporated. Basically a group of very idealistic but well-heeled, well-connected people in the world of business and government. The agenda of the World Federalist is to develop institutions of global governance. Not a world government, but just to strengthen the channels of communication between countries. And at the conclusion of all this, I told Jim about Zeke also, and Jim got really excited about Zeke and his campaign. In fact, after the meeting, he wrote me a long letter with ideas about how Zeke's campaign could be used to promote the idea of global governance, which is exactly what I had been thinking about. But anyway, at the end of the meeting, Jim walked me over to the wall, and he had a plaque up on the wall with the words of a Scottish mountain climber by the name of T.H. Murray. And the words were quite powerful to me, and they have formed the basis of virtually everything I've done since then. I've taken on a lot of big ideas that most people would kind of scoff at. The words go, I hope I can remember them, concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless plans and splendid ideas. Until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to turn back, and always ineffectiveness. But at the moment one commits oneself, then providence moves too, raising in one's favor all manner of incidents, meetings, and material assistance that no man or woman could have dreamed would come their way. I've learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do or dream, you can at least begin it. For boldness has genius and power and magic in it.